Every now and then, a motorcycle comes along that defines a generation of sport bike enthusiasts by taking the performance formula to another level. The twin-carb Triumph Bonneville in its day, the CB750 in the 1970s, the Suzuki GSXR and Yamaha R1, and of course the Ducati Panigale today. In the 90s, Honda set out to make exactly that kind of motorcycle, an era-defining sport bike, one that would not only take Honda to the very top of the food chain when it comes to sport bike technology and performance, but that would also bear a name as iconic as any in motorcycle history. This is the story of the forging of the great Honda Fireblade. Now, I'm guessing you guys feel the same way I do about just finding information and unbiased news out there. So I'm super excited to be partnering with Ground News for this video. This is such a cool platform, whether you're the type of person who consistently tries to keep up with what's going on, or you just want to check in every now and then. You can learn more about this at ground.news/Bart Motorcycle. Now, the problem with our current culture of news today is that it's so often filtered through and coming from one perspective. And what Ground News provides is a way not only to see where a story is coming from and what the political leanings, of that article are, but also just give you an overview of how a story is being covered, where it's originating from, and it will even show you which stories are just being covered by one side of the political spectrum with their blind spot feature, which is really amazing. So here's an example of a story that is a blind spot on EVs being eligible for tax credits due to the US loosening some rules. So here you can see there are 9 articles from the left, which is 47%, 8 articles from the center, and 2 sources on the right, making up just 11% of coverage. And there's a comparison tab to see what the various articles are focusing on. For the most part, these articles are all highly factual and are basically saying the same thing regardless of political bias. EV sales aren't going up at the same rate as in the previous years, hence the reason for loosening rules to really push sales. And I wonder how all of this could affect the electric motorcycle market in the US. But I just love how simply all of this is laid out on Ground News. It makes navigating these topics so much simpler. So if you guys are interested in trying out Ground News, we've got an awesome offer for you. Just go to ground.news/Bart Motorcycle and get 40% off your subscription this month with the Unlimited Access Vantage plan. So I've put a link in the description to just make it simple for you. That's ground.news/Bart Motorcycle. Check it out, and again, big thanks to them for sponsoring this video. All right, let's jump into the story. The 90s really was a revolutionary decade in almost every way. From technology to music to politics, things were changing rapidly and the future was really bright. And as the 80s came to a close for the motorcycle world, models like the Gixxer and Ninja were now years into their own development. The key sport bike manufacturers were poised to move things forward, and the world was their oyster. Still, the core elements of sport bike technology as we know it today was very much in its awkward toddler years. Honda really had a problem though. As much as they were known at this time for making the highest quality and most reliable motorcycles in the world, if you wanted an out-and-out raw performance machine, you were probably going to the other 3 Japanese manufacturers. But over at Honda, the chief engineer of R&D began to see the entire sport bike landscape differently. To him, the crop of 1,000 plus cc sport bikes available at the end of the 1980s, and just the way sport bike development was being approached even by Honda themselves, to him it was just not going to cut it. These so-called sport bikes were getting more powerful, but they were also getting heavier each year. Most of them were turning into sport tourers. And this whole idea of what makes a performance motorcycle would soon be turned on its head by this man. His name is Tado Baba. Baba was in the trenches when he thought up the vision for the original Fireblade, watching their current CBR 1000F make its way around the track. Bikes like the CBR 1000F may have sat at the top of manufacturers' lineups, and sure, they were fast in a straight line, but Baba wanted something different, a motorcycle that could not only produce this kind of incredible power and speed in a straight line, but also handle the corners with ease, a motorcycle that would feel like an extension of the rider, a true and complete sporting experience as he saw it. He may not have realized it at the time, but his vision for what a sport bike could be and how they would be developed would pave the way for all of the ideals and expectations we currently have for a great leader bike. To make such a motorcycle, Honda once again went to the well that is HRC, Honda Racing Corporation, and that was Tado Baba's home. With a large team of engineers and design specialists under his reign, he would begin a 4-year journey to bring this radical new motorcycle to production, aptly named the Fireblade. Originally, the Fireblade was to be 750 cc's. Not only would it be difficult to create a motorcycle that would handle the way that he envisioned and be as light in large capacity form, but they already had a 750 and a 1000, so they decided to create a new class, a 900cc sport bike. And they were able to make this into a small lightweight package by taking their current CBR 750 and essentially just making the stroke longer to create 893 cc's, and the engine would have, the 750's top end, but it would also now have a boost of torque. As much as the Fireblade's engine would see massive increases in horsepower over its lifetime, at the beginning of it all, the engine really wasn't the key. It wasn't as powerful as its peers upon its release, but it didn't need to be. Rather, weight savings was everything to Baba, as they did extensive testing for literally years, even going so far as to ditch the commonplace 17-inch front wheel for a 16-inch one for weight savings. Who does that? Who makes the wheels or one of the wheels smaller just to shave weight? Though in the end, they found this did give it incredible but sometimes scary fast twitch handling. The key to the Fireblade's overall design was the concept of nothing. That's right, nothing. Baba's goal was to make a motorcycle that was big and powerful, yes, but had the mass of a much smaller motorcycle. And the places where unnecessary mass would traditionally be, well, in place of that for this bike, there would just be nothing. Less mass meant less weight, which meant more speed and also less pulling needed on the brakes to slow down and stop. Performance for Baba would come when those places where other motorcycles had little bits of extra weight, the Fireblade would have nothing, or the necessary mass would be moved to different places. Weight distribution for better performance was helped for the project with the use of CAD and also computer-aided manufacturing. And the new Fireblade had its mass very much distributed to the center. Baba uses the illustration of a bowling ball. It's much easier to hold when it's closer to you, so for this motorcycle, the heaviest bits on the bike would not only have to be made lighter, they were also kind of compacted and brought into the center, and those extra bits that have to hang off the bike, like the exhaust and brake calipers and headlights, they were also tucked in as much as possible and made as light as possible. There's a balance though between strength and durability when it comes to motorcycle design, and this relentless pursuit of making the motorcycle lightweight and, that tension that you would have between lightweight but also strength would be key to not only Honda's sport bike development going forward, but really the entire industry. At the center of it all, the innovative lightweight twin spar aluminum frame developed over years of testing and again developed with CAD. This frame only weighed 23 pounds. The overall aesthetics of this motorcycle were and would continue to be massively important. Comparing the first gen Fireblade with its competitors is worthwhile. Look at the GSXR 1100 or the Yamaha FCR 1000. I don't know any better way to say it. The Fireblade at this time, it just looked better and sleeker, and it's aged much better. These other motorcycles do look like sport bikes, but they also look somewhat incomplete. Like there's so many leftover vestiges of 80s styling in these early 90s sport bikes, whereas the Fireblade really feels like a 90s motorcycle. It feels more refined and futuristic. But the real key to Honda's success for this revolutionary motorcycle was testing. For years, they would take the Fireblade to different tracks, bring on the best riders in the world, and pit the bike against the fastest and best 1000cc and 750cc sport bikes available, and just absolutely thrash the thing. This was not just a formality. They pushed testers to try to get any other available bike to compete with the Fireblade in terms of lap times, and slowly they'd progress and make changes until it was clear that everyone who tested this bike not only posted better lap times, they would do so deceptively. Like they would jump on another bike and be convinced that they'd recorded a better time, and still the Fireblade would be significantly faster because the bike and they as the rider, they just weren't having to work as hard. The dream of making a sport bike that functioned like an extension of the rider was really coming true. It was during this time that the name Fireblade came about. CBR 900RR FCR is fine for a technical name, and Honda has always been a fan of using these more technical names, especially for their more sporty motorcycles. Many of their most iconic and successful models didn't have a cool name at all. Think the CB750 or CBX. But at some point, someone threw out the name Fireblade, which was essentially an English translation of the Japanese word for lightning. When you picture lightning, that's essentially what it looks like, a jagged blade of fire. But the name Fireblade is so much more than that. Not only because it's a cool freaking name, but it really does epitomize what this motorcycle was all about. On the one hand, it's like a weapon, but it's also like lightning. It's a jolting, unexpected, and perhaps even scary motorcycle with quickness that was just found nowhere else in the sport bike market. The name stuck for those around the table, and it would obviously land with the general public as well. The final result of these 4 years of development was a motorcycle with the weight and handling of a 600cc Supersport, but the power of a leader bike. A true race bike for the road. But what would the world think of such a performance machine being available for production? The hype surrounding the Fireblade leading up to its release in 1992 was similar to the CB750 in its day. The rumors abounded. Had Honda rewritten the formula once again? Phillip Island hosted the Fireblade launch in February of that year. The press and journalists from around the world gathered. The spec sheet didn't impress for many because, again, horsepower was kind of everything. But the flashy graphics and unique and futuristic look of this bike, and most importantly, the compact, lightweight nature of the bike made it stand out. Here was a bike that looked like and felt like a 600 with 900 cc's of capacity. And early testers were actually somewhat scared of the bike. It was so light, but so powerful, and it had this incredibly short wheelbase coupled with that 16-inch front wheel, so it just gave it a different level of handling. Over in the UK, MCM got their hands on a Fireblade, and they compared it with its peers, the Yamaha FCR 1000 and Suzuki GSXR 1000. The Fireblade wasn't the most powerful, but it was by far the lightest, and it outperformed the others relatively easily. They called it a Grand Prix bike for the road. One magazine said this about the Fireblade upon its release: every so often someone comes up with a bike which sets new standards. The CBR 900RR is one of those bikes. It can outbrake, outturn, and outdate every other bike. Despite similar praises here in America, some early testers thought the bike should have a steering damper due to its twitchy steering, and somehow the motorcycle failed to win Motorcyclist's Bike of the Year to the GSXR 750, probably because their test bike had a poorly aligned back wheel and also apparently an insufficient amount of oil in the forks. I'm not kidding. Regardless, the Fireblade was a massive hit and sold incredibly well. The original Fireblade was great. But in these early years, the competition started to catch up, so in '94 they made their first big upgrade to the model, known as the Fox Eye. It featured major styling changes, mainly for the fairing, and also a few other really important necessary improvements. The gearbox was fixed, which had some problems. By the turn of the millennium, though, Yamaha had actually taken a page out of Honda's playbook, and the result was the R1. And it was, at this point, king of the leader bikes. So Baba once again was tasked with bringing the Fireblade into the future. At this point, the Fireblade didn't really stand for raw performance only the way that it did upon its release. Baba was very much interested in studying not only his competitors or just motorcycle technology or, figuring out how to get the best lap times. At this point, by 2000, he was studying humans, really. He was studying the riders, what they needed, what felt best for them. Because for him, the Fireblade at this point, it was really meant to be the kind of ultimate, usable, but incredible production sport bike. And so they got to work. With 2 years of development, they would take the Fireblade formula to another level: lighter, more powerful, easier to use, all new bodywork, and all new technology. For all intents and purposes, the 2000 Fireblade was an evolution, yes, but in many ways it was a new motorcycle. It had a new frame, it was more powerful, it revved higher, it had a bigger engine, sleeker design, reworked suspension, brakes, wheels, pretty much everything. It even had fuel injection. Despite not quite having the performance specs of its rivals, it once again began to outsell the competitors and reigned supreme at the top of the leader bike category. Though the enthusiasts will tell you the R1, it was kind of the bike to have at this point. The Fireblade would exist as a long-standing platform for continuing evolution, despite becoming more comfortable and usable through the next 3 decades. The Fireblade would always showcase what Honda was capable of as a sport bike manufacturer, with Baba continuously at the helm of the ongoing project until very recently, as he retired. Because Honda was sort of carving out a new class with the Fireblade, there wasn't really an obvious home in racing for this model when it first came out. So early on, America was really its playground in places like the GTO Endurance Series. In 2002, though, British Superbike made rule changes to allow for bikes like the Fireblade. Though it had a rough start in these early years, in 1000cc form, the Fireblade would win multiple British Superbike championships, but sadly it never won a championship in World Superbike. But really, it's the Isle of Man that would prove to be the place for Honda to show off the Fireblade's capabilities. Under the control of riders like John McGuinness, the Fireblade would dominate the TT and hold the lap record from 2006 through 2013 and then again in 2015. But for me, what's really important about the Fireblade is its legacy, which really does live on today, not only in the current crop of Honda sport bikes, but really in all sport bike and especially leader bike development. It taught the world a timeless lesson that more power isn't always better, and it isn't even faster necessarily, especially when it comes to sport bikes. You know, we wouldn't have motorcycles like the current, V4 Panigale without the Fireblade, because this exercise in weight savings at every single level, it all really started with the Fireblade for these bigger leader bikes. The Fireblade wasn't always and currently isn't the top of the sport bike food chain, but it's always managed to come back and kind of take that top spot at various points. Honda has always managed to get back to the Fireblade and once again kind of forge a new icon for each generation. The question is whether or not it will once again reign supreme, as companies like Ducati consistently outperform Honda not only on the track with their Grand Prix bikes, but also just in terms of production sport bikes. One has to wonder if Honda isn't cooking up another Fireblade kind of move for the industry today. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this history of the Fireblade. Let us know what you think in the comments below if you've ever owned a Fireblade in any of its various forms, and we'll see you in the next one. Ride safe.